Welcome back to another online lesson. If you remember from last time, we were talking about the Cold War and the events of the Cold War during Franklin Delano Roosevelt's administration, and we talked about such things as containment, as the domino theory, the Yalta Conference, and many others. Today we're going to be looking at the Cold War during the Truman administration, and Truman took over after the untimely passing of FDR. So let's get started. Today we're going to be looking at the Potsdam Conference. So how did the Potsdam Conference increase tensions between the U.S. and Soviet Union? After that, how did the Truman Doctrine lead to the U.S. involvement in world affairs for over 40 years? How was the Marshall Plan an example of the containment policy? We're going to talk about the Berlin blockade and the Berlin airlift. How did joining NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, involve the U.S. in foreign affairs? Why was the fall of China to communism worrisome for the United States? Keep in mind the domino theory. China's the first one to fall. Will the rest follow? Why did the U.S. get involved in the Korean War? And again, what is one question you have from this online lesson? So, looking forward. Looking to contain communism in Europe and the Middle East. The first thing we're going to talk about is the Potsdam Conference. And in July 1945, Truman meets with Stalin to work out a deal on Germany. If you remember, after the Yalta Conference, the Soviets were not happy about the way that went. They were still upset. They wanted Germany to be punished and pay huge war reparations. Again, that's the common theme. He wants Germany to pay for the damage they caused. However, Truman knew that Germany must be allowed to recover from World War II or it could fall to communism. So he wanted to keep that from happening. Truman offers Stalin a deal, which he reluctantly accepts. And a kind of a side story about this deal, Truman tells Stalin that we've just used a nuclear weapon on Japan. We're operating. And Stalin perceived that as he was being bullied into this. So he accepts it, but he's reluctant and doesn't really follow this deal. And this meeting, again, it further increases tensions between the U.S. and USSR. Stalin feels like he was bullied into this, and the Soviets are angry with Germany. Following up, the Truman Doctrine. In 1946, the U.S. sent the USS Missouri to Turkey to keep the Soviet Union from taking the Strait of Dardanelles. And this was a strait that was used for trade. And again, if you had control over that, you could control the trade in the area. In 1947, Truman asked Congress for $400 million to fight communist aggression in the Middle East. Because in the Middle East at this point, there are small factions of communists trying to overthrow governments. The Truman Doctrine, which worked to do this, free peoples who are resisting attempted subjugation by armed minorities or by outside pressures. So basically the Truman Doctrine funded military so that it could prevent small groups from overthrowing governments or larger countries from imposing their will on smaller, weaker ones. In the long run, this pledge would help fight communism worldwide. So we're trying to contain it and not let it spread. The Marshall Plan. In the years after World War II, Western European nations were faced with ruined economies, starving citizens, political chaos. Again, Europe is in shambles. Knowing that communism feeds on poverty, Secretary of State George Marshall proposed the European Recovery Plan. And this gave European nations American aid to rebuild their economies. And billions of dollars were sent over to different European countries. And again, this was hopes that they would not fall to communism, thus maintaining the containment policy. In response, the Soviet Union and its satellite nations, remember those are the nations like Bulgaria, Poland, countries that are communist but are not part of the Soviet Union, they rejected this plan. And again, this still increases tensions between the USSR and the United States. And these tensions get even more pronounced during the Berlin blockade and the Berlin airlift. The Soviet Union refuses to reunite their German zone, the German/Berlin zones, with the Allied zones. This is really when the Cold War begins. They start with a Berlin blockade, and you can see that here as a smaller map, but it's when Berlin was split down the middle. Soviets tried to starve Western Berliners into accepting communism with a land blockade in 1948. So they try starving them out and depleting them of their resources. The U.S. responds with a year-long airlift. This is called the Berlin airlift to supply West Berlin with food, clothing, fuel, medicine, etc., to help them resist communism. So you've got the United States flying into and out of Berlin to try and help these Western Berliners survive. This was a tremendous success, and again, it showed us that U.S. was committed to containment. And below here are some pictures of the goods being made ready, goods being loaded on planes. Here's flour here, milk being put on planes, planes that are getting ready to take off, and they're taking off and dropping the food to these people who are very happy to get it. So let's go ahead and turn and look at containment in Asia. So China does fall to communism. Again, we're worried because of the domino theory that China falls, Korea, Vietnam may be next. So China falls to communism. They were actually our allies in World War II. They were the enemies of Germany, and they're actually the enemies of Japan, more or less. So they were, quote unquote, our friend. The enemy of my enemy must be my friend. Post-World War II, China falls to communism. When communist Mao Zedong defeated nationalist Chiang Kai-shek and created the People's Republic of China, Red China. Chiang Kai-shek fled to Taiwan, and the USSR and China are both communist. This is scary because you've got two very large countries with large populations that are communist now. And just like we were afraid of, Korea or Northern Korea falls to communism. In 1950, the North, who are communists, invade the South to unify both into one communist nation. Truman sends U.S. troops, and the Cold War, it gets hot because there's actual fighting now. During World War II, Korea was occupied by Japan. At the end of the war, Korea was divided by the 38th parallel, and that is this line right here on your map. Soviets controlled North Korea, and the U.S. controls South Korea. To this day, North Korea remains communist and South Korea is democratic. This is an example of containment. Although technically this war had never ended, it's just a stalemate now. The Korean War technically has never finished. The North Koreans stay communist, but the South Koreans are democratic. So again, we're containing communism where it is. That about wraps up today. We've covered the Potsdam Conference, Truman Doctrine, Marshall Plan, looking at more containment policy, the Berlin Blockade, the Berlin Airlift, and containing communism in Asia. I hope you enjoyed it. I will see you next time.